Hello everyone and welcome to another episode on the engine swap of my Golf. Today we are attempting to fire up the engine for the first time while having many issues.
All my friends, yellow rider.
Okay, so before I start this thing, I want to make sure that everything is okay with the fuel supply and that nothing is going to leak out of my carburetors. So I'm quickly going to turn on the ignition and then we'll see if there is an issue here. As you can see, the left carburetor is flooding immediately. Although I like the smell of petrol in the morning, it would be nice if some of it would make it into my engine. To solve the issue, I'm taking out the float because most likely that is the culprit of this issue. I have the impression that the float arm was preventing the fuel needle from fully closing, so I bent it slightly, which hopefully will solve the issue. Okay, so with that issue handled, I think we can go ahead and try to start the car. To say that I am nervous is quite an understatement, but I'm confident that we can make something happen here. So here goes nothing. There is some life in it, but it's clear that something is wrong. The backfires are telling me that the ignition might have a problem, so we are going over it before trying it again. It sounds like it is running like it should, but the belt squeal is very loud and annoying. We're quickly going to tension the belt and then give it another go. Straight out of the box, the engine is already sounding great, but it will run even better once we tune the carbs. I'm starting with balancing the carbs using this synchronometer. It is an airflow meter designed to measure the airflow on the intake of the carburetors. By turning the adjustment screw that links the throttle blades of both the carburetors, the airflow of the slave carburetor can be matched to that of the master carburetor. The engine is running fine, which is awesome news, but to make it run even better I need to adjust the idle mixture. But the issue is that to do that the engine needs to be at operating temperature, and currently I don't have any fans on my radiators. So if I would take too long the engine would inevitably overheat. So to solve that we are going to be installing these two 10-inch Mishimoto fans. I picked up these fans because they are very slim, which is important for the clearance in my engine bay, and also because they will fit nicely onto my junkyard radiator. They come with some handy mounting brackets, which makes installing them very easy. With the fans mounted, I also sorted out their wiring, and then the unit can be installed back into the engine bay. The switch that turns on the fans is located on the bottom of the radiator. Basically, on one end of the switch there is 12 volts and on the other end there are the fans, and once a certain coolant temperature is reached it will turn on the fans by connecting the 12 volts to the cable that goes to the fans. To test if everything is working though, I'm going to bypass the switch with this cable, simulating that the right temperature is met. They are working excellently and pulling a lot of air, so I don't think we are going to run into cooling issues anytime soon. Okay, so we are a couple of weeks later. That is because I took a little break. I went on a short holiday. But now I'm ready to tackle this project again. The last thing that was done on camera was the install of the fans on the radiator, which would allow us to let the car idle for as long as we want, while we tune the idle mixture of the carbs. Off camera I have also done some other stuff, but we'll get into that later. Now I want to go ahead and tune the idle mixture of the carbs, but I kind of ran into a problem that we are going to need to solve first. There is a lot of engine oil under the car and that never is a good sign. I suspect it might be coming from the oil pan gasket because I never replaced it. Shame on me, I know. So here we've got the oil pan and it is clear that some oil is coming from in between the seal. It looks like the majority is coming from this side of the pan. There is even a little droplet here. And I'm kind of getting nervous because this is the side where I replaced the crankshaft seal. I'm hoping that there is no issue with that, because if there is an issue with the seal, it would mean that I would have to take the gearbox and clutch off again, which would suck. So hopefully our issue is at the oil pan gasket, So yeah, we'll start by draining out all the oil and then we can go ahead and unbolt it. Looking at the seal, I don't see any catastrophic signs of failure. It does seem like the seal is slightly stretched upwards in the areas where the leak is coming from, but it would surprise me that all of that oil is leaking out from there. But you never know, so let's slap a new seal on there and see what happens. With the gasket mounted, fresh oil can be poured in the block, and it is a good time to show you guys how much trickier it became to check my oil level since I installed these Dellortos. The oil dipstick is sitting right under the carbs, so if I want to check my oil level I need to take off part of the throttle linkage in order to access it. It is kind of a pain in the neck, but it was the easiest solution. I guess I'll just need to put a screwdriver in my glove box. With the oil pan filled with oil, it seems leak-free, so finally we can move on to tuning the carbs. So with that ordeal out of the way, we can continue with tuning the carburetors. So you already saw that I used the synchronometer to sync up the carbs. That means that each barrel should be pulling the same amount of air. Then next we are going to be tuning the idle mixture, that's going to be done with these screws. And then lastly, I'm also going to need to adjust the accelerator pump, but more on that later. Now we are going to worry about the idle mixture adjustment, and for that I have bought two tools that we are going to use. The first tool is this digital wideband air-fuel ratio gauge from Innovate Motorsports. Basically, this gauge will tell me if my engine is running too lean or too rich. It comes with an oxygen sensor that needs to be screwed into the exhaust, and then it sends its signal through a cable directly to the gauge. Regarding the position of the sensor, I have two remarks. The first one is that normally Innovate advises to mount the sensor in a more downwards position, and right now it is positioned upwards. The reason why you don't want to do this is because condensation water gets into the exhaust and it might damage the sensor itself. So normally you should mount it like that and not like that. But the reason I did it like this is because I don't really have any room to move it up higher, otherwise the cable would start hit the bottom of the car. And I'm also planning on removing the sensor anyway once the tuning of the carburetor is done. I'm going to screw this out and then I'm going to put in a bolt. So it doesn't even matter anyway, and it's only going to be for short periods of time. But normally, if I would want to keep the sensor for a longer period, it would be better to mount it up a little bit higher. And then another thing that I need to mention is that my sensor is placed quite far from the engine. Normally it is advised to keep it a little bit closer to it. But as you can see, I have two pipes running here and I would only get half of the reading of the engine. And then yeah, here it is not really easy to mount the sensor. So that is why I opted to put it here. It still is positioned before every damper and I don't have a catalytic converter, so I think it should be working fine here. And then the second tool I got is this laser thermometer. I actually borrowed this from my stepdad, who is a barbecue aficionado, but instead of a fat steak, we'll be using it to cook up a nicely running engine. I want to use this thing to get a better idea of the mixture in the individual cylinders, since my O2 sensor will only be able to give me the information of all four of them together. When, for example, one cylinder is running leaner than the others, I should be able to see that in its exhaust temperatures, in it being much hotter than the rest. That is the theory, but now let's try to put it into practice. To have a good starting point, I'm turning in the mixture screws all the way and then turn them out 2.5 turns. Then I'm hooking up the O2 sensor to the gauge, but before starting the engine I'm calibrating it quickly by turning it on while the sensor is in free air. After adjusting and checking the temperatures, I came to a couple of conclusions. The engine is running great at idle and at high revs. On partial throttle at low RPMs it does have a tendency to run a bit rich, so that will need further investigation. But the main issue I'm having currently is that the engine wants to bog down at sudden full throttle at low RPM. I suspect it has something to do with the adjustment of the acceleration pump on the bottom of the carbs. By fiddling with the adjustment, it is possible to change the timing of when the pumps inject fuel into the intake manifold, so I'm hoping that this will fix my bogging issue. I am not able to get it perfect, so I'm going to experiment by putting in a larger idle jet. Not only do these regulate the mixture at idle, but they also have a big influence on the rev range below 2,500 RPMs. Doing this, I have to start the entire tuning process from zero again, but soon I managed to get the engine running better than it ever did before. It's not perfect yet, but it should be good enough to go for a first test drive. So let's do that to gain some motivation. I am really stoked that I finally am driving the car after all of that work, but I immediately noticed an issue. When driving between 2 and 3000 RPM and applying half throttle, the engine tends to bog and hiss a bit, and looking at the gauge it seems like it is also running lean. At wide open throttle though, it runs perfect. It felt great feeling the power for the first time and hearing the engine properly, but my joy was cut short. I smell oil. So back home we go before the new project will turn into a giant fireball. And much to my enjoyment, it seems like we didn't solve the oil leak issue after all. This makes me suspect that something is wrong with the crankshaft seal, since it only seems to leak when the car is running. So I guess that means that next episode we'll be taking off the gearbox again. So the gearbox needs to come out, which sucks, but I hate ending an episode on a bad note. We did manage to start the car for the first time, take it for a drive, and we are this close to making the carburetors run properly. At half throttle there still is some work to do, but at least at full throttle the car is working excellently. Maybe it's just the car telling me I need to floor it all the time. Anyway, after reviewing the video footage of the first drive, I noticed that the engine sound wasn't really that loud on camera, but I can assure you in real life it is 10 times louder than it was before. So I'll make sure that in a future episode, once we fix all the issues and the carbs are properly tuned, we'll put a microphone in the engine bay so that you guys can hear it better as well. And speaking of the tune, if there are any of you who know what my issue might be, please let me know in the comments, it can only help me out. So that is the end of today's episode. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time.